The following series contains opinions from paid professionals. The information provided in this video is general in nature and not advice. For free and confidential support, call 1800 858 858 or visit www.gamblinghelpline.org.au. Another week, another episode of Grace and Gator's Cup Countdown. And Gator, so much to take a look back at last Saturday, so much to dissect out of a couple of key, hopefully prominent Melbourne Cup lead-up races for a lot of horses.
Yeah, good call. There were a couple of flashing light runs, weren't there? You thought the likes of Francesco Gatti, saw what Ilias did in Sydney, so even future history was good. So yeah, some cracking runs.
We'll get to those races shortly, but breaking news over the weekend in terms of a European horses coming out to be the Raiders in the Melbourne Cup this year. One of those won't be getting on the plane, and that's Harbour Wind for Dermot Weld, who we know, of course, has already won 2 Melbourne Cups. Yeah,
I did hear that, and it also, there's been a question mark around Aidan O'Brien's triumvirate of Northern Hemisphere 3-year-olds. You know what a great strike rate that demographic has had in our greatest race. So again, just some question marks around those. We know Vauban and a few others are definitely here, so we'll have some flavour, but it looks like, as I say, just some question marks.
There are some question marks, and speaking of Aidan O'Brien with his crop, I mean, he came out quite publicly and said that you know, some of the vet checks and the protocols in place are ridiculous, to use his words exactly. But at least the vets are over in Ireland and in the UK and in Europe doing these checks so that the horses don't have to waste their time and money sending horses out here to, you know, ensure their suitability for the race from the very get-go. So there's plenty to still pan out in the international space, but for now it's all about the locals. And of those locals, let's find out with Tim Ryan from TAB whether there have been any fluctuations with the TAB market update.
G'day Grace and Gator, it's great to be back joining you with another TAB Melbourne Cup betting update. Not sure whether things are any clearer after Saturday, as we saw very little change to our TAB betting market. And our punters, they've defaulted back to the favourites, Vauban and Warmonger, the two most popular in our betting in the last week. We saw the $15 chance St George run on Saturday, and while we kept him as a $15 chance, I was left a little bit flat by his run, and I was expecting a little bit more. Out of that race, we saw a firm for Francesco Gatti, 51 into $26, but I'm not really sure about that Foundation Cup form. The other race that I'm not really sure about is the Underwood Stakes. We saw failures or slight failures in Plaster Carousel and Faulkner Park, and they're both significant drifters in betting. We saw a firm for the winner there, Buckaroo. He showed the Sydney form was strong. He was 101 into 34, but he has to be some query at the 2 miles. Speaking of Sydney form, I think we have one up here in the winner of the Kingston Town Stakes, Ilias. That was a strong race, and I think he's got a lot more improvement to come. He's going to run a short price favourite in the Metropolitan in a couple of weeks' time before heading south for the Caulfield and Melbourne Cups. 2 miles, maybe it's a slight query, but this horse has a ton of class, and I gave him a really good trim on Saturday, 34 into $18, and he'll be one that we'll be looking to keep safe. So, the New South Wales horses are firing. Can you Victorians lift your game?
Gee, 360-degree feedback from Tim there, that's great. But look, Ilias was super impressive, wasn't he? And he ran time. He still got to run the trip, as he sort of referenced there. So there was, I disagree. I think there's some ripping runs in Melbourne, and Buckaroo was super impressive. He's a different horse since the gelding op.
That's the beauty of this, is that it's all about opinions. And Tim said he thinks that there are quite a few flops in some of those Melbourne races, and I tend to disagree as well. I think we can highlight quite a few good runs out of those races. Well, let's take a look at some of those key races from Saturday, and we'll start with the Foundation Cup. Over 2,000 metres, Positivity won the race, Gator. She gets her golden ticket into the Caulfield Cup. As with her and others in the race, any that are flashing lights for the Melbourne Cup for you?
Look, I thought she did a good job. She was tough. She was only early in her campaign as well. She certainly acts like she'll stay. She gets in pretty light. So I think the horse she beats an interesting one, future history. I gave that horse a live hope in the race last year, and it just, the whole race shape was against, probably a bit early in that horse's career as well. So good to see that horse back on track as well. St George, I'm not putting the pen through yet either. Second up off 60 weeks, and he didn't have a hard run first up, so I think he'd be fitter for that. So he's not off my radar either.
interesting about Future History in particular, because you're right, I was the same. I gave him a live winning chance in the Melbourne Cup last year. He started with his SP on the 5th line of betting in that race, which in itself needs to be respected. So he's on track, no doubt. Probably most of those horses head towards the Bart Cummings on Turnbull Stakes Day, 2,500 metres. We'll find out more about them then. What about in the Group Wood Underwood Stakes? Now, for a lot of these contenders, Faulkner Park, Plaster Carousel, they were first up over the 1,800 metres, and it was a hot tempo, wasn't it?
It was a strong tempo, and add to that the track played a little bit off inside. So I think Faulkner Park, who was left on that inferior ground and was held up, I certainly thought he was a forgive run. Plaster Carousel pulled up with a bit of a respiratory issue, so that's not ideal, but again, a forgive run. So a real crossroads race for those two next time.
Coco Sun is one I'm keen to be following. I thought she was great considering she had come out of a 1,400 metre race first up, where it was a real sit and sprint. I thought she'd be vulnerable, and she proved me totally wrong. So she goes to the Might and Power Caulfield Cup. Who knows? Melbourne Cup, she's a staying mare now by the Autumn Sun. She might be able to go on with it, and certainly one to be following. Now in Sydney, the Kingston Town, Elias. How good is this horse from the Gay Waterhouse and Adrian Bott stable?
I love the win. He chased a strong speed, he ran time, he was... The fight he showed late when a good one, Cheoff, really went to him. I'm a fan of the horse. Sure, 3,200 is a whole different ballgame, but we get a good guide on him as he heads towards the 2,400. Whether it goes Caulfield Cup Metro remains to be seen, but I think we get a good test of his endurance there. Yeah,
it's going to be such an interesting one with a horse that we just still don't know how good he is.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, I mean, his overall winning record is outstanding. So he's certainly one to be putting in the black books and following wherever he goes to next. Well, last week, Gator, I identified a couple of horses I was keen to follow. I'm certainly forgiving the run of Athabaskan. I think that could have been a second up, maybe a bit flat run, looking for a trip now. So I think he could still be on track. What are you thinking?
Yeah, look, I think there are a couple of obvious terrific runs. We've spoken about Elias at length. Buckaroo, who won the Underwood, was super impressive. They both still have to run the 3,200, but they're obvious. I think a couple that are less obvious, the likes of Francesco Guardi, who did manage to run the quickest last 200 of the race in his latest effort. And he was a favourite for this race a couple of years ago, remember, and then sort of lost his way. So he interests me. And we've touched on Future History as well, who's back on the radar for me.
Well, certainly let us know your thoughts, any horses that you're keen to follow this far out from the great race. This Saturday, we've got a couple of races, the listed Ansett Classic at Mornington and also at Rosehill, the Group 3 Colin Stephen. But for now, that's all we've got time for. We'll catch you next week on Grace and Gator's Cup Countdown.
You win some, you lose more. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.